Okay, thank you.
Okay, it looks like it's 2:00. Okay, how's everybody? Okay. Okay, it's about 2:00, and this is our last regular class because the next one is going to be about a movie, which is on the 19th. And we are being streamed already. I see that we're being streamed on YouTube right now, and you can always go back to look for it some other time. No, somebody's talking, but I don't know who, and it's kind of warped, the sound. Maybe you should mute yourself. Okay. This is a slide I usually read at the beginning of the class about our streaming and the days of our classes, but this will be the last month that we hold this class. So there's no more next first and third Wednesday except for the next class, which is April the 19th. And I was just notified by King Ang that they have a change of policy. Starting in May, they're going to require people who go into these classes to be a member or pay some kind of fee, but that's not going to affect our class because we end the class this month. Yes, it's April. Okay, so if you're interested in some other activities of King Ang's senior healthy living activities, you can watch out for their new announcement. Today we're going to do two songs. One is In the Sweet By and By. I'm sorry, here's a letter that should be capitalized. Okay, Sweet By and By. And the song was written by Bennett and Webster. One does the lyrics and one does the music. And I matched it with the same song with the same music, but the lyrics were written by Li Shutong, which is Qiu Liu. That means the willow trees in the autumn. And when I sent out the class handout last Thursday, I did not add the third bullet, which is Petrarch and the Renaissance humanism. I added them today after I went through the class material. So if you like, you can add this at the bottom of the today's topics slide. And also there are a few changes in this, but you can't see much here. This is just as I sent out earlier late last week. And at the end of it, let me tell you something about here. This is from our last class. I had a list of vocabulary, but I somehow during the class, I missed these few words. So I added them here, including controversial, plagiary, and novice. But at the end, I added these that needed some editing. One is I said eavesdropper. That would mean people who listen to other people's conversations secretly. But I had it as eavesdropper in the handout, but I decided to take out the PER, and then I did not change this. And when we come to that, I will tell you why. And this little part I probably add or not. Anyway, if you compare to the handout, there is some difference here. Let's just start with the first word, which is flourish. Flourish in the beginning is a verb that means you wave your hand, sometimes in a very energetic way. So you could be waving your hand, meaning that you were telling some people to look at you or notice your action or speech. So that's a verb. However, because of this action, people also use this to describe some other activities, such as things or people like baby or plants that grow very well in a very good environment. So we say somebody flourished. It no longer means that he's waving the hand, but because he is growing very well, especially about young people who in the right condition could grow better than those who are not in the right condition. So flourish means waving the hand, and it means to grow very well. And because of that, it also has further extended to other meanings, such as you do something that is very smartly done. For example, you sign your signature, and at the end, you would draw a very pretty line at the end. Then that is considered you're doing a flourish to your signature because it gets very showy and pretty. Okay, so it's 华式, okay. So in the beginning, it is to just wave your hand, and then it becomes to grow or developed in a healthy or vigorous way. Healthy, we all know healthy, but vigorous means very energetically. So if it's a child, it can grow very happy and learning new things. But if it's a plant, it could be just growing lots of branches and flowers and so on. Especially as a result of a particularly favorable environment. So you don't just grow very well by accident. Usually it's because your parents take care of you, feed you well, make a good environment for you, and so on. So a child would flourish in a very healthy environment. Here is an example of the using the word, which is wild plants flourish on the banks of the lake. So these plants are growing well, maybe because the lake brings some wet water to the bank, and they grow well because of the water. This is not because somebody took great care of them, but because it's a good environment in which they can grow well. Okay. So it has a meaning. It can be used as a verb and a noun, and as a verb, it means to wave your hands or wave something. Here's an example of the sentence, which is "Happy New Year," he yelled, flourishing a bottle of whiskey. I think there's no quotation mark here. I'm sorry. Okay. Flourishing means just to wave, in this case, a bottle of whiskey. And other similar verbs could be brandish, which also means to wave something, but it's usually not a hand. It usually, brandish means you take something and you wave it, wave something in your hand. And wave and shake and wield and raise and swing. Swing would be like this one, a certain way of waving. And twirl would be like this. Words that sounds like twirl always mean in a circular motion. It could be a swirl or a whirlpool and things like that. And as a noun, it can be a dramatic gesture, such as the waving of a flag. The example would be, with many flourishes of the captured banner, they marched down the avenue. So people are waving the banners that were captured from the enemy, I suppose. So this flourishes means the waving of the banners. Banner is usually a longish flag. And ornamentation, which means to beautify something, such as a signature. His signature ended with a flourish, which means at the end of his signature, he made some strokes that are quite pretty. Okay, when it comes to music, it could be a segment of a music in a ceremony, such as fanfare. So it should be a very catchy sound, such as da-da, da-da. So things like that would be considered a flourish. Yes? Could you say that again? Okay. So that's it. This is a very common word, which means to wave something, but then it's derived into other uses that are very good. Okay. And this word we've done before, which is secular, and it is the opposite of religious. So a book can be a religious book or a secular book, which means it's not religious. It's a regular political book, a gardening book, or whatever book. It's not a secular book. A secular book would be the Bible or the discussion of Christianity or Buddhist sutra and so on and so forth. So secular means non-religious. And then I came to this word, which I mentioned when we were talking about an author, an Italian author or writer, whose name is Umberto Eco. And we say that he is a medievalist scholar, which means that he studies or teaches or he does research on the medieval ages or the medieval period. This in Chinese we would say 中古时代. So this MED means in the middle of something. So medieval is an adjective. We often say medieval period or medieval ages, or we can say Middle Ages. Middle Ages also means medieval period. And it usually is, when people talk about medieval period, they were thinking about some the time between 500 AD and 1500 AD, which is 西元500年到西元1500年之间. This is called the Middle Ages or medieval period. And when we say something and we use the adjective medieval to describe that something, it could mean it's old, dated, obsolete. Obsolete means 过时了哈, or old-fashioned. So we use this word to describe something which may or may not be from the medieval period. We say that guy is obsolete or dated, he's old-fashioned. We can use the word medieval to describe him. And another way that we use this word to describe is brutal, because during the Middle Ages, the rulers were very brutal. There were lots of fighting and killing. So when we say somebody behavior is medieval, then we can mean that he's very brutal, which means 很暴烈. Okay, barbaric 就是不讲理的野蛮人哈。Cold-blooded 就是说when he does something, he's not emotional, he doesn't feel or abide by the rules of the common behavior. Or savage, which means 野蛮哈. For example, animals are savage, and some people could be savage. Or vicious could mean with evil intention, a person who is evil and brutal and violent. Then we can also use the word medieval to describe such a person. If we use medieval period, Middle Ages, or Dark Ages, we usually mean from the 5th century to the 15th century, given more or less around that time, because when you say 500 to 1500, that's not 5th to 15th century. So it's just roughly that era, that period of time. We call that medieval period. It started with the collapse of the Roman Empire. Okay, let me see. I should take out this. Okay, because I repeated the same thing a little later. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire was in the year 476. So people generally think about that time is when the Middle Ages came around. So what, of course, the end of that empire is a monumental event. What makes that the beginning of a period is mostly because the Christian church, because when Christ died in 33 AD, we generally think that he died in 33 AD. He only had a handful of followers, and then they just grew and grew and grew. And around 330 AD, it became the national religion of the Roman Empire because of Constantine the Great. 君士坦丁大帝, so by the time 476 happened, which is the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, Christianity has flourished very well, and the majority of people in Western Europe had the Christian faith at that time. And as the church became ever more powerful, they exerted a hard rule on the people. That's why the Dark Ages came around, because the church forced people to behave in the way the church would want them to behave. And among the things that the church told the people to do is to listen to the clergy, do not behave beyond your norm, and don't put yourself up front. Don't think of yourself. Just think that one day you will finally die and you will go to heaven. That's all the meaning there was to the life of a commoner. So from 500 year AD onward, people just obey the church and they don't do anything out of the ordinary, and they listen and behaved and follow the rulers. That's why it's a dark age, and not only because of the church, but also the rulers. Actually, the church and the rulers were collaborating to enforce these rules so that people would know their places and not to expect anything else, and not to behave wildly, or that's why it's called the Dark Ages, because nothing else grew during the Dark Ages other than the kings and the church. And that lasted 1,000 years. And at the end of what happened at the end, it's a fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire 我们叫做奥图曼帝国或者叫做奥斯曼帝国. And it's when we were children, we learned that was a period called the Eastern Roman Empire. But later on, they called it Byzantine. Byzantine became a more common word to describe Eastern Roman Empire. And that Eastern Roman Empire ended when Ottoman, the Turkish Empire, emerged, and not only emerged, it emerged and existed for quite a few hundred years until the fall of Constantinople. That means the entire Western Europe fell under the Turkish Empire, even though the Turkish Empire did not control the entire Europe, but Europe was in a mess for 4,000 years. Okay, it's quite chaotic and not doing much at all. That's why it was called the Dark Ages. So specifically, you may say medieval period started in 476 and ended in 1453. But to round the numbers up, you can say 500 to 1500. And who decided that was called the Dark Ages? Because people who lived through that 1,000 years, they had no idea that they were living in the Dark Ages. They were just living in the Dark Ages without knowing such a term existed. Then came the Renaissance. Anyway, that is 文艺复兴, the rebirth of the world. The world means the Western Europe. When the Renaissance came around, people who were leading that movement were coming to that, okay? They decided to call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages because they think that their world went through the very dark period of 1,000 years, and now they are breaking through. So this is a new birth of the world, and it started in Italy. So you have Italian Renaissance, and you have French Renaissance, and you have English Renaissance. All these came after the Italian one. And when you think about the Italian Renaissance, you would think about Raphael, Michelangelo, and Da Vinci. These are the artists. On the other hand, you have the writers. You think of Dante, 就是但丁啊, and the Petrarch. And today we're going to talk about Petrarch because in our education, he was most often ignored, and he's monumental in this period. And Petrarch is a person who invented a term. He used the term Dark Ages to describe the time before he was born, the 1,000 years before he was born. Okay. And on the other hand, I want to sidetrack to this word, which is middle age. Middle age is not Middle Ages. Middle Ages is the medieval period, while middle age is when we talk about a person. A person was born, and then a teenager, and a young person, and a middle-aged person, and then okay. So middle age to a person is around 40 to 60 years old. And when you say middle age, you're talking about a person who is about 40 to 60 years old. But when you say Middle Ages, that is the 1,000 years before the Renaissance, okay? And the Dark Ages was termed by Petrarch. And it's a period of time between the fall of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Italian Renaissance. I checked this word, 文艺复兴, huh? There are many ways to pronounce it. So any way you say it, it's okay, huh? Even though it's often pronounced as a Renaissance, but the ne is important because that means birth, and re only means again. So ne is important. So you can say Renaissance, but some people also say Renaissance, but Renaissance is anyway, it's good, okay? And the Age of Discovery, huh? Here comes the Renaissance, and then the Age of Discovery. The Age of Discovery is just a bit after that, because usually we say 文艺复兴 was around 14 or at the end of 13 something, huh? Like Patriarch, that's the time. But the Age of Discovery is just a little bit after that. And the Age of Discovery is our geographic discovery. And you would think about Da Gama, Magellan, Christopher Columbus, all these people who are brave enough to sail into the unknown and trying to discover new land or new marine route. That's called the Age of Discovery. 有这个比方哥伦布啊、麦哲伦啊，或者是葡萄牙人达伽马什么的，这些都是发现新大陆的新的航线的人哈。So for Columbus to go to discover the Americas, that was in 1492. So it's just a little after people like Michelangelo or Da Vinci or Raphael. So I would say like 50 years later. So this period in this chart, it started with SPQR, which is if you go to Rome and all the souvenir would have the word SPQR on it. It means some kind of Roman senator or regular people. They are all in control of their government or whatever. And at the end, that's a picture, that's a drawing by Da Vinci that represents Renaissance. This is the Dark Ages, and this term is coined by Petrarch, okay, Petrarch, okay. I pronounced it wrong. As Patriarch is the 男性为中心的系统哈，他呢是他自己的名字 it has nothing to do with him, and he was born in 1304. That's just at the beginning of Renaissance. And he lived like 70 years. And this is a painting. Of course, we don't know exactly how he looked like. And this is a painting which makes him look like a clown. But these are two other entirely different rendition of his face, but they're very different. Okay, so we don't know what he looks like. That's him. Okay. And there's a statue that represents him beautifully on the right-hand side of this picture, of this slide. And this sculpture can be found in Uffizi Palace, which is a very big museum in Florence. Florence was the center of the world at that moment. First, because how do you call that? I forgot how to call that family. Three syllable.
Medici.
Yeah, that's one. Yes, thank you, Eileen. Medici, yeah, because Medici, they started as a pharmacist. They sell drugs or herbal medicine, and they became very rich because they became the bankers, and they were in a lot of businesses and very, very wealthy, and they sponsored many countries. Their children married to the kings and the queens in the entire Europe. For example, the Queen of France was one of their daughters. And Medici is so rich that he almost single-handedly supported the Renaissance. And all the people we mentioned, like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, all came from Florence. So in Florence, the biggest museum is Uffizi. And of course, there are other museums like Accademia, where you could see the statue of David. But a copy of David was also in there, the square, the town square. I guess it's called the Signora. Okay. So you have this 2 or 3 very different rendition of Petrarch. I cannot pronounce it right. Anyway, so he is the person that I want to spend a lot of time on today. And in Chinese, we call him Pei Tuo La Ke. However, if you go check its different translations in mainland, they usually call him Bi De La Ke. It's just when you go to things like Wikipedia and click convert to the language, you can click on lots of different Chinese, for example, 繁体台湾、繁体香港、繁体马来、繁体or 大陆的简体 and so on. All these versions, you can click and find out different translation of the same word. For example, we say New Zealand, and on the mainland, they would say 新西兰. So if you click on different translation, you'll get to different versions. So this person, that's his last name, and the Patriarch is his English name. But of course, he did not know he's called that name. He has his own name in Italian language, and it was Petrarca, okay, ended with CA. But his anglicized name is Petrarch, okay. And his first name is Francesco. He was a scholar and the poet of early Renaissance Italy and one of the earliest humanists. When we came to this country, many of us went to the graduate school, and we learned that many schools have humanity, and they have arts and science, and so on and so forth. In Taiwan, a college under a university, for example, Taida, you would have 文学院、法学院、理学院等等的. But in the West, you have humanity. They don't say literature, but they say humanity. And to us, we thought, okay, so that means human. Human is human. We are human. So we just thought, okay, these are the departments that dealt with the humanity, okay? But exactly the word humanism or humanist was used to describe a person in the or after Italian Renaissance, and their specialty, or they study they research and they read and write the ancient literature and the philosophy and so on and so forth of the ancient Greek and the Roman society. So the word humanist means the study or the following of ancient Greek and Latin or Italian culture or philosophy or literature. That's what the word humanist or humanism means. And it became the tradition since all the Western European countries started to have universities, and they established a university, you can say exclusively, or at least in the beginning, to study humanism. So that's why these colleges are called they study humanity or whatever. So this is a word that means the study of ancient Greek and Latin culture. Okay. So for 1,000 years, from 500 to 1500, the entire Europe, they forgot their roots. They forgot about Greek and Roman culture, and they were just honest, pious followers of Christianity. And they'd never think, oh, I want to be happy today, or I want to be happy in my life. Those are bad. Your priest will never let you have those thoughts. You cannot think of your happiness or your future or your life. You can only say that I am working hard in this life so that one day I will die and go to heaven. That's for 1,000 years. It was like that. So there's no element of yourself in your life until the Renaissance. So that's why they say human, which means people look at themselves and discover that there's more to the world than Jesus Christ. Okay. And how did this period start? It's because our hero, patriarch, okay, I'm sorry, I just can't pronounce it well. Anyway, this person, he rediscovered Cicero's letters. Cicero is我们叫做西塞罗, he was a writer before Christ. It was from 106 BC to 43 BC. So he was an ancient Roman writer. Of course, before him, we got lots of Greek writers. We have Aristotle, Plato, and Sophocles. And we have playwrights like, did I say Sophocles? I should say Socrates. Okay. I was going to say Socrates and Aristotle and Plato. Those are the three ancient Greek philosophers. On the other hand, you have ancient Greek playwrights, 写剧本的, like Sophocles and Euripides, and there's one more, I forgot. Okay. Anyway, so these are the ancient Greek writers and the philosophers. And then later on, you have the Roman Empire, and you had Roman writers. Cicero would not be considered one of the Roman Empire writers. Roman Empire started with Caesar because it was a republic until Julius Caesar, he grabbed the crown and became a dictator. That's when Italy became the Roman Empire. So Cicero was right before that. These are the Latin writers, and there are others like Horatio and some others. And there's Boccaccio, and so on. So patriarch Petrarch. Okay, I keep adding an I there. Don't follow me. Okay, Petrarch is the person who discovered Cicero's letters, and because of that, he started the revolutionary movement of Italian Renaissance. So that's why people think Petrarch is the founder of Italian Renaissance humanism. Okay, so that is a hugely important in Western Europe, and we in China we never experienced such a period because there was very little contact except for a few merchants on the Silk Road. So the two sides, I mean China and Europe, developed independently for many centuries. And so when this huge thing happened in Western Europe, started with Petrarch, that's called the Renaissance, we were not aware of it. We're still sticking to our 45经, huh? Well, I would not say 45. 45 started with Zhu Xi. Zhu Xi decided that he would choose 4 canonic works from the Confucianism and make them into 45. So before Song Dynasty, which is like 1100, around that time. Before that, Chinese had just Confucius work, Confucian, okay? So we were never exposed to this kind of rebirth because we were never under the control of the church. We had more or less free thinking for a long time without any of the religions putting us under shackles, okay? But Petrarch happened, and he brought about Renaissance. And he was just a little bit after Dante. Dante was a revolutionary figure, but he wrote his Divine Comedy and so on. He wrote those works that were studied for the next 600 years or 700 years. Dante was great, but when you talk about the Western culture, Petrarch is even more important than Dante. Dante 就是但丁 Okay, so we had Dante, who was born in 1262, and Boccaccio, who was born in 1313. These are all writers during that period. Some were older than Petrarch and some were younger, but they were all very important. Boccaccio wrote 十日谈 Decameron, which is about 10 people in a villa, and each one telling a story. And this kind of story also influenced other writers like Chaucer in England. So all these people suddenly found freedom in writing, and they were very important to the development of their language in their own country. For example, before Chaucer, there was no English as you know it. There were extremely few people who wrote anything of any importance, but very few, hardly any. And after Chaucer, a birth of a new language was born, happened, okay? And in Italy, it's similar, but it's earlier. And because of these people, Boccaccio and Dante and Petrarch, they made the Italian language modern. Before them, it's all Latin, okay? So Petrarch is very important to the Italian literature and to this whole world, because the entire Western civilization because of him, they developed each country's language. And Germany was a little later. Their language was more or less created by Martin Luther, who translated the Bible into German language. And in the way of translating some big book, they actually created a modern language, essentially single-handedly. Okay, so Petrarch himself, he is a poet, and he wrote essays and books and the sonnets. His sonnets are very, very well known. Sonnets means 14行诗, because this kind of poem, the rule is to write 14 lines. So it's in Chinese, we call it 14行诗. And lots of other countries' poets wrote similar poems because of him. And he looked back in history and he decided that it was 1,000 years of dark ages. And he coined the term dark ages. And he decided that from now on, the world is changed. We're no longer going to be in the dark ages. However, people just believed him and used this term not until maybe the last 100 years, people suddenly realized that maybe that's a little exaggerated, because during that 1,000 years, something did happen. There were arts and literature and the different things during that time. It's not entirely dark, but it is common for people to accept that for 1,000 years, it was really very dark. And in order to give you more impression in your mind about the thing, I put this Chinese part in here. And his name is Petrarch, and he is an Italian scholar, poet, and the early period of a humanist. He is a humanist. We translate it into 人文主义, which is very good in reflecting the content of this whole thing, except that when you look at the word 人文主义, you wouldn't know it is about European people studying ancient Greek and Roman literature and arts. Okay, so that's where the word humanism comes from. And this person, he famously said, 人的学问代替神的学问. He is telling the entire Western European people that your life should be filled with knowledge, thinking, and the arts about people, not just about God. For a long time, people never look at themselves as people until he came along. Okay, so he's considered the father of humanists. He's also the first tourist. I found that very interesting. In the past, people go from place to place because they want to do trade, or they have something to take care of in a faraway place. They're always on business or 出差, okay? But Petrarch is a person who deliberately went about climbing a mountain for the fun of it. It's just because he wanted to see the mountain, he wants to see the view, and so on. So he's considered the first tourist. But in China, we've got lots of tourists in history. They were never influenced by the Western culture. For example, Liu Zongyuan wrote a lot of travel essays. Or what's that, the person who went to Yunnan? Of course, his name is... What's that?
徐霞客.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. Xu Xiake is, we consider he's one of the first tourists, but before him, there are a lot of people. I think Xu Xiake probably is from the Ming Dynasty. So he's really late. And we had, for example, Confucius. He would go to a park, and that would be not a park, but he would go by the river and having a picnic with his students and have a good time. That's when he said, 无语点也, because everybody says, oh, I want to be this, I want to be that, but only 增点, he said, I just want to be sitting by the river and enjoying the scenery and so on and so forth. And Confucius said, that's what life should be like. You should not be thinking about making big money or being a governor, ruler, or a premier or whatever. That's the spirit of being a first tourist, okay? And Xu Xiake is, of course, famous for being a traveler, and in the eyes of many other people, he's crazy. Just as we went traveling everywhere, and many of our friends would say, why would you do that? It's such hard work, and you'd never know what's going to happen, and so on and so forth. But I am all for this guy who's the first tourist in the world, okay? I like that very much. So we're talking about this humanism, and it's a revival in the study of classical antiquity. Antiquity 就是古老的东西哈. Classical, when we say antique, you have an antique mall in which they sell used goods, but they call it antique. But later, if you go there often, you would learn to enjoy the beauty of old things. You don't have to buy. Actually, some people don't buy new things, just to buy used things. They are, well, better made, okay? And so this is called the humanism, and it's especially Renaissance humanism, which means in the maybe 14th or 16th, 14, 16, or 14, 15, and 16th centuries, people started to study those ancient humanism, okay? So it becomes a Renaissance thing instead of, say, Aristotle studying philosophy. That is a humanistic study, but it's not a Renaissance humanism, okay? And okay, I've talked about all these. Then I come back to here, to Umberto Eco. That was the person we mentioned the last time, and he's a medievalist. And he wrote many books, but these are the two that are quite well known, especially The Name of the Rose is a fiction that became a bestseller. You could also even say it's against his wishes. He was just a quiet medievalist studying and writing, and all of a sudden he became a worldwide bestseller writer, which is a huge surprise to him. Another book he wrote is not a fiction, and it's called The Unicorn and the Dragon. And when we talked about him, we mentioned this book because Umberto Eco, he organized a first conference in Guangzhou in 1991. It's called the Frontiers of Knowledge. He recognized that they in Western Europe, they're all dealing with themselves in a circle, while there are other circles in the world that did not get any influence from them. So he's thinking that this circle of Chinese or Asian culture and this circle of Western European culture, and they all have their edges of their influence, which is the frontier. So you have a domain, a country, or whatever, an empire. On the edges, it's a border or the frontier of this entity. And these different spheres of influences, you have frontiers that can meet on the Silk Road, for example. So Mr. or Professor Echo, he organized this conference that deals with the exchange of the civilizations that did not get too much exposed to one another. So he had this conference, that's the first one. And later on, he had the follow-up conferences that moved from places to not just Europe, but also in, Africa and so on, in different places. So that's called the itinerant seminars. Euro-Chinese seminar, that is called Misunderstandings in the Quest for the Universal. People like to, how do you say universal? 我们这叫做环球或者宇宙或者是整个的世界。You are in your own universe and you try to think of other people in terms of your thoughts. So when you meet somebody who doesn't speak Chinese and that person wants to learn Chinese or learn about Chinese things, then they are trying to compare the different cultures and trying to find something that's comparative. They're trying to make it universal. They want their idea to apply to other worlds. So this conference is called Misunderstandings in the Quest for the Universal. And after that conference, which happened many times from places to places, and he produced this book called The Unicorn and the Dragon. And unicorn represents the ancient legendary Western European animal, while the dragon is the ancient Chinese legendary animal. They probably never existed, or maybe people dug up some fossils, like how do you say that, 恐龙? I can't remember the word for 恐龙.
Dinosaur.
Dinosaur. Yeah, thank you very much today. Dinosaur. So they dig up the fossil of the dinosaur and they imagine, oh, there must be an animal who looked like this and so on and so forth. And so in the West, they imagine a legendary animal as a unicorn. In China, we imagine a dragon. But that doesn't mean we did not have unicorns. I'll show you that we also had unicorns. Okay, so this book is called The Unicorn and the Dragon. It represents two ancient cultures with two different legends and the two different cultures. Okay. So in the later period in Western Europe, they draw or they paint or they wove the tapestry of unicorn this way. It is a beautiful white horse with a straight horn that sticks out very long, and it's got spiraling pattern. Okay, so here it's a single large pointed spiraling, which means 旋转的 horn. So this is probably in 13th or 14th century, they had this kind of a painting of a unicorn. But before that, say before Christ or before whatever, they did not look like this. So now we think unicorn all look like this, but they were not like that before. And this is the European version of it. And we have some other pictures. Okay, so it was also once a goat-like or a cow-like instead of a white horse, but they just eventually decided that it should look like a white horse. So it's usually described as a woodland creature. So it lives in the wild and not in your house or not on the ranch. It's a woodland creature, and it's a symbol of purity and grace. It certainly is beautiful, and pure, and can only be captured by a virgin. Those are all stories that later people added on. And here I have this 一角鲸, which is a whale. It's about the size of a beluga whale, which is a white whale. And this one has lightly gray and with spots. And it's got one horn that is really sticking out. So it's possible that some people found this horn and imagine this growing on the horse or whatever, and imagine that kind of animal. But this kind of whales do exist, and it's called the narwhal. And it can be translated into 一角鲸 or 独角鲸 or 长枪鲸 because it's so straight, it can be used as a weapon. We've seen elephant tusks. They are like this, so very rarely they would consider that a weapon. And other horns or antlers of animals, they were not used as a weapon, but a narwhal horn can be used as a weapon. I was on the Alaskan cruise, and we went from places to places, and there was one small town that did not have very many other things there. I think it's called this. I forgot. It was a gold mining town, and they have this tiny little museum that I went to, and I saw this horn, straight horn with a whirling pattern on it in the museum. There were several of them, and the picture on the lower right, this is several of them getting together, so they conceivably could be fighting with each other using that horn as a weapon. But I've never seen anything like that other than a dead horn in the museum lying around in the corner. Here I have this map that tells you where you can find the distribution map of narwhal. Okay, at the beginning, you look at it, you couldn't figure out where's where until you know that you're looking at the North Pole. So right in the center, it's the North Pole, and around this North Pole, you have Alaska, Canada, and you have Greenland and Iceland. And here you can see more familiar places. They are in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and this whole thing on the right-hand side is Russia. So this kind of whale can be found in this solid blue areas. So it's mainly a North Pole kind of animal, and those striped area you can find this kind of animal only occasionally, rarely. So you can more often find them here because there are people here. There are hardly any people living there, probably none. That's why they are not found very much often. Okay. So that's something maybe you have never heard of, narwhal. Okay, that horn is often sold in the store as a unicorn horn, but of course now people know better. They no longer sell it that way. Okay, so I just mentioned that I would tell you about Chinese unicorn. So Chinese also have unicorn, but it did not fare as well as dragon. So we don't mention it very often, and there are few stories about them. So as early as 山海经, which is before 秦始皇, there was this book called the 山海经 with all kinds of fantastical stories about history and geography and animals and plants and so on and so forth. But probably half of them were imagined, not true. So you cannot read as a real historical book or a geography book or whatever. But in this book, it described there's a place where there's a mountain and the water flowing into wherever, and there's this kind of animal. It is white, has a white body with the ox tail, and it has a single horn. So there was, in the legend of Chinese at least, a unicorn there. And in Dongjin, which is much later, like 600 AD, there was a writer or a scholar called Guo Pu, and he wrote a lot of fu and essays and so on. And he mentioned this kind of animal. So unicorn can also be a Chinese thing. And this thing is from India. On the left-hand side, it's a seal, 就是一个图章，一大块, a large, maybe clay or some ceramic or something, and people carved things on it. And if you feel this with something like a putty or something, and you put it on the right-hand side, and you get that. That's exactly the thing that the artist intend for you to see. That is a unicorn with one corn on top of the head and with the oxtail. So this is an animal with 4 legs. As to this part, I'm talking about this part. They are not sure what this is, so they decide it could be an incense burner, which means 香炉, or a manger. A manger is like when Jesus Christ was born, his parents were in Bethlehem and couldn't find a hotel room, so he was born in a manger. A manger is the trough where you put feed for an animal, and horses or cows would come here to eat grass or beans or wheat in this container, in this vessel. So that is called a manger. 中文说马槽或者牛槽也是可能的哈。So this thing in front of this unicorn in India is either an incense burner or a manger. So now you see this is really old, 2600 BC. That's much older than any of those you can find in the West. So unicorn is not a strictly Western European thing, but they just flourished on it. It was in the story, and they make more story about it after the year 1000. So all the things you see are probably around 1300 to 1500 years AD, and they were about a single version of a unicorn, which looks like a white horse with a single straight horn in front of the head, and it was embellished from an ancient legend, but these kinds of legends happen all over the world, and they were not necessarily an animal looking like a horse, or the horn may not be straight at all, okay? So I had fun talking about these things. Okay. The next word is parlance, and it's similar or the same as terminology or jargon. It is just a way to say things, but it's specialized, so we use a different term. For example, if a group of people were working at, say, Microsoft, they would constantly mention a few words that we people, regular people, don't use, maybe about their software or hardware or the technology or something. So you have special jargons that are used by certain people who are engaged in a certain line of work or interest, and that's called the jargon or terminology or parlance. 那是术语的意思。This word is feudalism, and I think we went over this word several times. But here I just want to stress that it contains 2 important meaning. One is the personal ownership. So the king would give out this city or area to one of his relatives or a general that did him favor or won some war for the king. And this would be his 封地，就是把这块地划给这个人哈。So this, how do you say it? Maybe a count or a duke or a baron or whatever, each of those aristocrats would own a piece of land that is their feudal land. So they own it. All the people and the things growing on it or whatever, they all belong to this person who is a noble person. So that's one element of feudalism, that is a piece of property and everything on it that is given to a noble person. Okay. Another meaning is this person who got this huge favor from the king or emperor, he would pledge his fealty to the king. So the second element is fealty, which means fidelity or allegiance or faithfulness. He would stay true to this monarch. This king or emperor would forever be his lord, and he would follow his direction and support or protect his benefit and so on. So this is called the feudalism, partly about the property being given to a noble person, and partly in return, this noble person would pledge his fidelity to the monarch, to the king. Okay, so this is the two elements of feudalism. And the next word is massacre. You probably have heard of this word. It means 大屠杀. So there are several elements in it. First is not just to kill one person. It's usually killing a lot of person. But the second element is these people are not soldiers with weapons. They had no control of their life. They were killed by you, not when they or holding some kind of weapon that they can fight back. They are totally helpless. And this thing is absolutely wrong and violent and just a bad thing. So you don't say massacre unless it is really, really quite bad in a large scale and killed very violently with no reason or necessity. That's called a massacre. Here we have a few words, a considerable number, which means a lot of people, with little or no resistance. So they had very little, or they had no way to resist your violence. And it's indiscriminate, which means you do not gather a group of people and pick a few out of there and kill the rest. Indiscriminate means you kill everybody in sight, whether they are rich or poor or very knowledgeable, skillful, or whatever. A person is stripped of any dignity or any quality that is valuable to that person or to the society, and you just kill every single one of them. So that is called a massacre. And without necessity, because these people are not fighting against you. They were just there and they are helpless, and you kill all of them. So this is not necessary. And it's also contrary to civilized norm. As a civilized community, this is not the right behavior. So it is contrary, just against the civilized norm. So similar words can be a carnage or mass murder. And the next word is winch. Winch is a kind of round thing, and you circle around this thing with usually rope, and when you pull it, the wheel would go like this. It is a device to save you strength. For example, you want to lift something and use this kind of winch so that when you pull this side, the other side will be raised and much easier. You can raise heavier things than you would usually be able to by using your bare hands. Okay, so we had this thing. It's a rescue mission with two people, probably an rescuer and a victim of some disaster, and they were hanging on this. This is probably not a rope. It has to be very strong, maybe a steel cable, and there is some kind of winch in that helicopter. And here on the right-hand side, you see some big wheels with cables around it. And this is on a fishing boat. And when you haul in a large catch of fish in the net, just one or two people are not able to pull it onto the land. So you would use a mechanical device to pull in the net in order to harvest your fish. And then this is probably more older, ancient. So this is just a rope with a bucket, and you drop the bucket into a well, and then you just turn the wheel. This very, very rudimentary wheel on top, and this winch will bring up and down this bucket to retrieve water. This is a word that we forgot to mention last time, which is controversial. And I remember years ago, we don't have this word in Chinese. And then we got this word from English, and we translated it as 有争议的. It is because people having different opinions, and they don't just agree with the other person, and they want to discuss or even fight over it. That's what's controversial about it. So it's a debate or discussion of opposing opinions. So it's like a 吵架. So both sides have each side has a different opinion, and they would not be pushed over by the other side. So they have a heated argument. That's called a controversy. And most American people would say controversy or controversial. However, in the old days, English people would say controversy or controversial, which is very difficult for you to accept right now because most people don't say it that way. But when I hear Trevor Noah say it, he learned English from the older English people who were in South Africa. So his English is the ancient version of it. So he says controversy, and he says controversial. Okay. We could say controversial, okay, but he says controversy, okay. I can't pronounce it well, okay. But nowadays, nowadays they say controversy, and more traditionally is controversy, okay. So that's the way it is. But in the US and Canada, we say controversy, okay. This is another word that we forgot to mention last time, which is plagiary, which means that you didn't write it or paint this or compose it yourself, but you stole it from some others. Most often it's a college or a high school student. The teacher says, go home and write a thesis or write a paper about something, and they did not study the book, so they would copy it from some other people. I remember when my mother was in high school, and she would do all the math homework, and she went to school, and some of the stronger students, the bulliers, they would grab her homework and copy it and submit to the teacher as if they wrote it themselves. What my mother did is she would do it entirely wrong. What I said, she told me is all the 最小公倍数, she would write 最大公约数 and vice versa. So all the homeworks were wrong. And the people who grabbed it and copied it all got the wrong answer. And she would retrieve her homework and change everything and hand it to the teacher. So all the other people got it wrong. Okay, that's called the plagiary. But this is just open plagiarism. What I just mentioned, they would rob it from you and copy it. But most of the people who did this thing, they did it secretly. They would go online and find some other samples and copy it, and so on and so forth. But the internet made this possible for millions of students. However, the teacher got smart as well, because you can just search for the entire sentence and you find the original right there online. So lots of students were caught when they did this plagiarism, and nowadays the teachers had such hard work. They had to be very computer savvy. Okay, so plagiarism is as old as history. Many people were doing that, but it's wrong, but it's not illegal, especially in the Chinese mind. We did a lot of, in our 加工出口区时代, we would copy all kinds of merchandise and then mass produce and sent to other countries to sell. And we earned a lot of money by infringing on their copyrights. For example, Disney is very strong about their copyright. So they went all over the world to find people who infringed on their copyright. This is a verb which is called infringe. Well, when somebody has a copyright or invented something, another person who did not do the research or did not write it or draw the painting, they violated the copyright of the copyright holder. So that's a verb called infringe. So legally, most of these are not illegal, not criminal, unless you violated their copyright. Okay. I think I've talked a little too much. Okay, that's the wrong medicine. Okay. We're coming to the sun soon, so I have time to rest. So if you infringes on their copyright, here is the word infringement, okay, right here, infringement. So then it's illegal for you, and especially in the Western world, the legal system is clogged with a lot of copyright suits because it's illegal, and you have to pay a heavy price if you copy something that is copyrighted, okay? But in China, we used to not care too much about who was the original writer. So especially when you write poem, you would allude to something from other people's poems. For example, we say 和 或者汉就是和木边一个口. So somebody would write a poem and you would write something to rhyme with his poem. For example, there was Song Dynasty poet who's called He Zhu. He Zhu wrote a very famous poem. I probably cannot recite right now, but it's very famous. It's got 一川烟草满城风絮，梅子黄时雨. He's talking about 春天. So this is beautiful words. And he became very famous, and people call him 贺梅子 because of his famous line, 满城风絮 梅子黄时雨. Okay, so 有梅子 in this line of his poem. And I was going to talk about infringement, but it's not infringement. His good friend Su Shi, he wrote another one, and he matched every final word in that poem. And he wrote Qing Yuan. It's original is a Qing Yuan, of course. And Su Shi would say, 西湖烟雨 something. 辋川图上什么样 and his concubine, he calls him 小蛮, which is a famous concubine's name, but his concubine is called a different name. He was thinking about Xihu, and he was far away, so he wrote this entire Qingyuan, thinking about Xihu, and how one day he was in the rain, and his concubine mended his clothes and so on. He wrote a beautiful poem. I memorized it 5 years ago, but I could not come. 梅子黄不是梅子黄时雨，他是说辋川图上寻春木, and so on and so forth. Anyway, this is not plagiarizing, but lots of people, for example, Jin Shengtan, he said, he claims that he found an old copy of 水浒传 in maybe a used bookstore, and it's new and improved. So he published this entire 水浒传 with lots of changes, he said was from an old copy, but he actually did it. So most of the 水浒传he produced was exactly the same as the original one, except that he embellished this from here and then there are lots of places that was changed. And from a Western literary person's point of view, they think this is highly irregular. It is illegal to change other people's work and claim it's a newly discovered version. But in China, we did not have the concept of copyright. Okay, in the ancient days, you just write a book, and maybe people would borrow it and copy it and become their own version. There was no publishing houses in the beginning. Of course, later in Song, especially Song Dynasty, they produced a beautiful 山本书. That's because printing became so popular. That's another story. When you compare the Western culture and the Eastern, we had a paper and a writing system since Qi Shi Huang and the Donghan. So that's a very old history. While in the West, they had no paper and no writing implement. So their studying scholarship is very limited to a very, very few people who had access to Bibles or such books. But we were earlier than them for thousands of years. So that's a difference between the two cultures. Okay, then we have the word novice, which is a religious word. In Christian word, you have a monk or a nun who are new people inducted to their religious system, and they need to be trained. So this word novice, you can think of Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music. She was a novice in a convent. Okay, so this is a religious word, and that was used popularized into common everyday use. You could have an apprentice who learns about how to be an electrician or plumber or whatever. And in the beginning, they were apprentices, and you can call them a novice, but later they become professional. So 见习 is also another word. You can say intern is another word for novice, and that was used in the beginning about medical doctors. Okay. This is just a synonym and antonym. When you go use the dictionary all the time, you come across these two words, 同义字跟反义字, this one is important. We say canon. Canon is a classical and revered works, literary works, high culture. In the West, there was only Bible. You can only study Bible. So Bible is some kind of canon. And later on, people started to write, and you have famous works that all the people want to read and learn. But in China, it was entirely different. We had, since Han Wudi, Confucian canons. And he ordered by his edict, people should not study any other books but Confucian books. So we had 五经 or 六经, 就是诗书易礼乐春秋, which 乐 was lost, so 变成六经变成五经. These were all edited by Confucius. So we say Confucius, 山诗书定礼乐赞周易修春秋. So all these canons were edited by Confucius and considered canon. And throughout 2,000 years, they were the only books that were considered to be canons. And any scholar need to study only these books. So it's very, very different from the Western world. In the beginning, they only had Bibles, and starting with the Renaissance, they had all kinds of things that are free and available all the time. And of course, Chinese people also write. They write lots of things, but they only go to school to study Confucian canons. And they knew it by heart, every single word of it. So you have two very different systems prevailing in the society. Here is some example of Western canons. In China, we just have a few canons, but I'm sorry, I have to close that. And the reason I do here is I don't like this little thing there, so I want to cancel it. Okay, so in this picture, you have Dante, 就是但丁在左边, and in the middle is Homer because he's blind. So you can see this is a blind person. And on the right, it is Virgil. Virgil is also just before Jesus Christ. So these are three writers of different periods. Homer is very old, about 8th century before Christ, and Virgil was right about Christ, and Dante is the beginning of Renaissance. And these three people, what they wrote became canon in the Western culture. That's why they were depicted here by Raphael in a big painting. Raphael is one of the three Renaissance painters, greatest painter ever. He is called the Lafayette. He and Da Vinci, Da Vinci, and Michelangelo, they are the three giants of that era. And they not only are painters, they are also sculptors and engineers. And in Da Vinci's case, he does a lot more than all these things. He invented the submarine, 潜水艇, or 飞机 or 风筝 or airplane. Yeah, he dealt with a lot of engineering things. That's why we usually use Da Vinci to represent that era. Okay, so Raphael did a painting which is called Parnassus. Parnassus is about artists, mostly visual artists. And Raphael did this fresco, which is called 诗画. So after a person painted the wall with fresco, it is wet. It needs to, you need to wait until it dried up, and when you can put on the second layer. That's called the fresco, which means fresh in Latin. So this painting is called Parnassus, and it contains these three figures in a very large painting. And these people are the key figures in the Western canon. This very large painting is this one, and it's filled with great painters or artists. And this painting is called Parnassus, which means on the mountaintop where all these artists congregate. Of course, they are not born, they don't live in the same time. He chose all the important artists and put them on this Parnassus, which is the mountaintop. And he not only painted this great big picture, which filled up the entire wall, he also filled the walls of 4 rooms with pictures like this. And the most famous, the one we're looking at is the one on the left, which is called the Parnassus. And on the right-hand side of equal size, this is called the School of Athens, 就是雅典的学校, And in this, you would see Aristotle, Socrates. Okay, I was going to say Sophocles. Socrates 就是苏格拉底和亚里士多德、柏拉图这些都在这个上面. And there are other philosophers of many different times. So these are 2 of the pictures that Raphael painted, and you can see them in the Vatican Museum. 梵蒂冈教怎么说 Vatican 翻译作什么教皇什么教什么 anyway 就是他的皇宫了. Okay, Vatican Palace. So you can see these, and there are more. This one is the School of Athens. You can see Aristotle was here. Here is Aristotle, and there are many other people. These are the philosophers, and there are other pictures of different themes and different people. Okay, so this you can say is Raphael's contribution to, not contribution, attributed to all the canon figures in the Western culture. And in England, you would consider William Shakespeare's work as canonical. All his works are excellent and read by many people and known by many people. So this is a canon work. Of course, later on in China, we could also consider certain people's work as canonical. However, throughout history, we only had the Wu Jing. This is a more recent version. It's called the Great Books. Yeah, when I was still in the university, we had a new graduate school library built, which is much bigger than the old library. And they bought lots of books like this. And I would go there to read them all the time. Okay. So that would be a series of books of canonical work. And it can also apply to music. So all these people wrote canonical musical masterpieces and so on and so forth. But in China, you had Wu Jing or Liu Jing. Wu Jing is Liu Jing. without the one that was lost, which is Yue Jing. And then came along 1,000 years, I wouldn't say 1,000 years. It was in like 1100 AD, but that was like 600 years after. Jesus Christ. Confucius was like 500 years before Christ. So you add that to this 1,000 years of Songchao. So that is like 1,500 years that Confucian canons became 四书五经 because of Zhu Xi. So he chose the 4 books and added to the 5 canons to become 四书五经. And the 十三经 is even much later. That was in the Qing dynasty. Qing dynasty, all these barbarians from outside the Changcheng, they came into China and became the Lord. What I'm thinking about is Manzhou Huang. These people, they didn't come here to say that we are the boss here. You have to learn our language and you have to learn our culture and literature. No, each one of their emperors came in and devoutly studied everything Chinese, and their calligraphies are so wonderfully, none of us could compare with those Manchurian emperors' calligraphy, okay? And they, in order to make the Han people happy, they created several large projects, including 十三经注疏. 十三经 was created by the emperor. I don't remember which emperor it was. It must be Kangxi Yongzheng. It could not be Shunzhi. Shunzhi is too early. Probably Kangxi's time, they gathered to keep all these knowledgeable person happy and occupied. They want them to do commentary on all the 四书五经 and so on. So because of this project, you got 十三经, which just is an expanded version of 四书五经, 六经七, whatever. It becomes 13 canons because, for example, 诗, there's one 诗, okay, 书, 书, I guess there are other 书, but notably you have 易, 有周易, 有三礼三易, 还有春秋, 有左传、中阳左传、公羊传、谷梁传. So all these becomes one 经 added to the original, so it becomes 十三经. So it's a big project that occupied a lot of scholars who would otherwise be writing things about how bad this emperor was. So that's a way to keep them happy. Okay, so the 5 canons becomes 13 of them. I'm not going to talk about this, but I just want to remind you that we learned this word last time. It's called the meta theater. And we mentioned this word, which is not very commonly seen, because we were talking about Thornton Wilder, and he wrote many revolutionary plays, such as Our Town and the Skin of Our Teeth. Those are really great examples of meta theaters. And the other word we also mentioned before is mime. Mime, in English, we call it pantomime, but nowadays all over the world, we just call it mime. And it is to a kind of performance on stage that the person does not say a word. He uses gestures, he behaves in certain ways, and so on and so forth. For example, he would be going downstairs and he would bend his knees. So he would go, people in the audience would see him going lower and lower and lower. He was trying to bend his legs more and more, but other people look at him and they knew that he was coming down the stairs. So there's many standard way of expressing things without saying the words. So that's called a mime. So this is ancient form of performing art. However, with the invention of movies with no sound, which is silent movie, you would be watching storytelling with no sound. So oftentimes you would see slides of text inserted into the movie, or more likely they just act as if something was happening with their gestures. So many of the silent movie actors can do a great deal of mimes in the movie. Most famous would be Charlie Chaplin. So this is a picture of Charlie Chaplin. He was a famous comedian in the silent movie era, and he's so funny. Yeah, even nowadays, if you go to the library or go get it streaming from like Netflix and so on, you could watch some of his very great movies that are so funny. For example, The Gold Rush, the City Light, or he's got lots of famous movies you can watch. They're so much fun. The other people in the silent movie era who does a lot of miming are including Harold Lloyd and Buster Keaton. Yeah, I've seen a few of Buster Keaton. Very, very funny as well. They would exaggerate their gestures. Okay. And Chaplin may be the best documented mime in history, because all the mime actors before him, they were not videotaped. But Charlie Chaplin was very, very well documented, all his movies. And the one coming after him was Harpo Marx. These are the Marx brothers. From the top down, you have Chico, Harpo, Groucho, and Zeppo. And they have, I think, another brother who was not on stage, but he did the administration, booked the theaters, and so on. They did such things. And the second, who had gray or white hair, is called Harpo, and he does mime. He never spoke a word when he's on stage or in movies, but he is not dumb. He could speak. Off stage, he could speak, not like a regular person, but he wasn't always a person who does not speak. He pretend to be not being able to speak, but he is funny with lots of many of their routines were passed down. For example, if you watch I Love Lucy, some of the episodes, they had Harpo as a guest, and Lucy would pretend or imitate his actions. Okay, so they had huge influence, even though not speaking is kind of a detrimental thing when you are on stage, because you say something, it's so much easier to communicate your thoughts to others. But mime is really interesting, and lots of people enjoy watching mime even after the movies have songs. And this is the greatest mime actor ever, and his name is Marcel Marceau, and he is French. And he's got lots of TV shows as well. He played the Bip the Clown, who's probably dumb, but of course he's not. The next word is eavesdropper. Okay. And this is eave. I show 4 pictures of buildings with eaves, which is 屋檐. An eavesdropper is someone who's hid under the eave to listen to the conversation that was not meant for him to hear. Okay. I mentioned that in the novel called Gone with the Wind. In the first chapter, they use this word a lot, and it was translated into Chinese as 檐下鬼. That is a person who secretly or stealthily not known to the conversationist. People would be talking there, not knowing this person is on the side listening to them. That is a eavesdropper. Okay, so eavesdrop is an action, so it's a verb, eavesdrop, and the person is eavesdropper. And I happen to want to give you the original word eavesdrop without the PER. Then I realized that the word eavesdrop can also be the person who listened. And that is because of King Henry VIII of England. We'll come to that in 2 slides. So you're listening there, and you knew everything that they did not want you to know, and you did not get their okay without their consent, which means they did not say it's okay for you to listen, but you were doing it secretly. And the origin of this word is water come down from the eaves. 屋檐就有这个水这样流下来. The dripping water from the eaves of the house. That is somebody who hides there would listen to this drippings, which is the conversation that's happening inside the house. So it's like the water was dripping on the ground on which such water falls. And the person, if he's there, he would catch that water dripping from the roof. And how about King Henry VIII? King Henry VIII is, of course, the father of Queen Elizabeth I, and he famously had 6 wives, and many of them he beheaded. He chopped the head off the wife so that he could marry the next wife. But of course, not all of them were chopped off. The head was chopped off, but I guess 3 of them were, and the people just conveniently say that he chopped the head of all his wives, but he didn't. His first wife, Catherine, was a queen or the princess from Spain, so he could not possibly chop the head of a Spanish princess. So he just retired the queen and never visit her again. But her head, he was able to keep her head. But then he chopped the head of the next one, Anne Boleyn, and so on and so forth. And one of them died before him, so he did not chop the head of this one, and maybe the 3rd, the 4th, I guess. And the 6th one also survived him because the king died before he could chop the head of this last wife. So of 6 wives, he chopped the heads of 3 of them, okay? And he lived in this beautiful castle or palace. This is called the Hampton Court. The Hampton Court Palace was not built by Henry VIII. He had a cardinal called Thomas Wolsey. If you have seen the movie A Man for All Seasons, in the very beginning, within 5 minutes, you will see Thomas Wolsey dying in the bed like that. He was played by Orson Welles. Okay, I'm sorry. Couldn't even pronounce his name. Orson Welles is his name, okay? He played Thomas Wolsey in the beginning of the movie called A Man for All Seasons. And if you're ever going to watch a movie, that is the movie I recommend. My all-time favorite was that movie, okay? And this, in the beginning of the movie, Thomas Wolsey was a cardinal, 红衣主教, and he actually built this fancy palace for himself because he became 红衣主教. He became the cardinal. He was very proud, and he built this castle or a palace. And at that time, he was a last Archbishop of England because Henry VIII decided to divorce his wife, so he had to open a new religious system, which is the Anglican Church. So that was the last Catholic Church archbishop in England. That's Thomas Wolsey. When Henry VIII decided to savor the relationship with Catholic Church, he decided to get rid of this archbishop and have a new church established. And for many reasons. One of the reasons is all the churches all over Europe are very, very wealthy. They are fancily built with all kinds of treasures inside. And by declaring himself the king, Henry VIII, by declaring him out of the Catholic Church, he confiscated all these church property and he became very, very, very wealthy. And many of the other kings all over Europe decided to do that. So you are left only with the bottom half of Europe, which included Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, and so on. So these are Catholic Church. They still believe in Catholic Church and follow the Vatican all the time. But with Martin Luther, he declared that he leaves the church, and along with him, there were lots of other European countries, especially in Northern Europe, like Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and the Northern Germany, and the Netherlands, so on. The entire Northern Europe became 基督教. So they savor their relationship with the Catholic Church, and this is what Henry VIII did. He himself, unlike Martin Luther, who came after him, I believe. Oh, maybe not. Okay, Martin Luther was in 1517. So just about the same time when Martin Luther became a new religion, you can say it's a Lutheran branch of the Protestant. But in England, almost the same year, King Henry VIII decided to get rid of the archbishop. And so he confiscated this castle, and this became his own residence. So this is the residence where we found eavesdrops, okay? This is a castle. If you go to England, or especially London, it's a very short day trip from London. You can go with any day trip to go to Hampton Court. It's a very big place. And here you can see lots of eavesdrops. They are called eavesdrops because they are carved there as eavesdroppers. Instead of eavesdroppers, they are eavesdrops. So every corner of the big halls, they have, or the king, Henry VIII, he told the workers to put eavesdrops in every corner of this. Here is one in this lower right corner. You can see they are situated here, okay? This is one of them. And those are the individual ones enlarged. So what he did is that he wants people to know that you should not eavesdrop on my property, and whatever you say here, it could be overheard by other people. So that's why he put all those things there. I've never heard of this, the word coming from this place historically, but I'm very happy that I learned about it. It's very interesting. And if you are interested in this, you can look for PBS documentaries. In 2015, they have Inside the Court of Henry VIII. And in 2013, they have Secrets of Henry VIII's Palace. They both talked about the eavesdrops. And it's just something because he ruled with the iron fist, 他是铁拳管制他的人民, and the people who displease him will get their head chopped off easily, including Thomas More in the movie The Man for All Seasons. And he just warned people that you should not eavesdrop, and you should be careful that other people are eavesdropping, and so on and so forth. That's why he made the palace looking like this. That's how this word started. And this word is called the progenitor. I don't know where the accent is. Progenitor. Okay. It's a 始祖, 就是 the beginning, usually the man of the house and all his descendants came from him. So he is the original person. In China, in Chinese, we would say 始作俑者, but it came from the analect, which is 论语. It does not really simply mean 始祖, but we have this word 俑 in there. And 俑 is a figurine used in funerary places, like put in a tomb, like a terracotta soldiers in Qin Shi Huang's tomb. That is a 俑. 俑 is a figurine that you put in the dead person's tomb to symbolize that even though this rich and famous person died, he is taken care of by these servants and the soldiers and so on and so forth. And these are called 俑. And Confucius in Analects, he said, 始作俑者其无后乎? 就是说, people really should not have put figurines in people tomb. Okay, so that's so we usually just say 始作俑者, 其实 it's got a lot more meaning than 祖先. And here's a word, genealogy. And nowadays, maybe some of you are interested in genealogy. You have people and families and siblings, and the family gets bigger and bigger, and you want to create a chart. And you also want to go look back to see your ancestors and your cousins and so on and so forth. So genealogy is a very much active study for regular people. If you're interested in that, you can go to an Apple Store or Google apps and buy probably a free app, so that once you put in your computer, you can drop in your different nephews and the nieces. And so instead of you having to draw an elaborate chart, you can use an app to do the thing. So remember the word genealogy. It might help you in this work. And this is the last word, which is choric. Chorus comes from chorus, but when you say a regular chorus, it's adjective. You hardly ever use choric as its adjective, but it's famous for being in the Greek play. In a Greek play, you would have people acting a story on the stage, and there would be a few other people, usually not too many, maybe 2, 3, or 5, of course, can be more, but it doesn't have to be too many people to form the chorus. They were not the characters in this show, but they are there to keep you updated with the story. They would tell you the background of the story, and they would express their feelings from the happening, what's happening on stage. They would say, oh, how could he do this thing, and so on. So in a Greek play, you would have a chorus there, and they would do things that would comment on the main storyline. It's similar to Thornton Wilder's Our Tongue. He used some of the choric figures. So that's the last word we know, which you hardly ever encounter in your everyday conversation. So here is one sound that we're going to watch. Are we going to watch it? I want to skip it. So you all have this. You can just, how do you say it? You can just go there to watch this. There are many, many versions of it. And I chose this one, which was not sung by a famous person, but the words seem to line up better here. Okay. And I'm not going to go over the words of this lyrics very much, but because it's very simple. And I'll tell you how it happened. It was written by two people. One wrote the lyrics and one wrote the music, of course. And this person who wrote the lyrics, we call him the lyricist. One day he went to his friend's home, or his friends came to visit him. Anyway, they met in the home, and the composer himself was very, very down. When we say a person is down, he was depressed. He was not happy, and he was very gloomy and inactive. And the lyricist said, "What happened? What, are you all right?" And the other person says, I'm going to be better by and by. 就是说我会慢慢变好的意思哈。It'll be all right by and by. And this lyricist, a light bulb lit up in his head. 他忽然灵感发了灵感. And he sat down and wrote the lyrics for this song. The title is called In the Sweet By and By. And it says, there's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. It became so Christian, Every Christian knows how to sing this song. It's because it tells you that look into the future. Whenever you feel sad or down, you can look into the future and have faith that God will make things better for you, and you can cheer up because your future is good. So it's like there is a place in the future that you can expect to reach in order to make you happy. So this lyricist wrote this to cheer up his friend. And after he wrote this very simple song, his friend, who's a composer, he wrote the music for this simple song, and together it became an all-time bestseller. Every Christian could sing this song. It's just something to keep a faithful person in good spirit because of the belief that one day things will be better. So it's a very uplifting song, okay? And this is a copy of this song that's sold separately, not in a hymnal book. If you go to a church nowadays, in fact, I've never been to a Catholic church, but all the churches I went to were, Protestant church, which we translate into 基督教, which is really a wrong translation. Okay, so if you go to a Protestant church, you sit down and there are benches, and in front of you, on the back pocket of the front row of seats, you can get Bibles and hymnals. It's either called a hymn book, HYMN, hymn book, or hymnals. Both means the same thing. That is a collection of Christian songs that you can sing from. And the preacher would say, today we're going to sing 263 or whatever. And the number is also printed in the daily schedule, sometimes on the side of the altar or things like that. So this sheet, the cover sheet, is for this song only. It's probably a very early version of it, because afterwards it becomes so popular that you can find it everywhere. It became a gospel standard. Gospel is 福音书, and there are 4 people who wrote gospels in the beginning of the New Testament, and they are Matthew, John, Luke, and I always forget one. 马太福音, 路加福音, I don't know. There's another one. Okay. So there are 4 gospel and the 4 gospel writers. They all wrote the gospel probably within the 1st or the 2nd century. So they were not direct disciples of Christ, but they were close enough. They know people who were there in order to write the story of Jesus. And their story are not necessarily the same. There are differences in each version of the life of Jesus in the 4 Gospels, okay? And here it says about the song, in the New Orleans jazz tradition, the song is a standard dirge played in so-called jazz funerals. Dirge is I good. In a funeral, especially when there's a march, there would often be a band playing songs that are sad and slow and give you hope, make you feel that the person is going on to a better place. So that's a dirge, which means A jazz funeral is a funeral usually not just in the church, but on the street as a parade, and they play jazz music. When I read this passage, immediately it came to my mind of a 007 I saw, one of the early 007 movie called Live and Let Die with Roger Moore in it. Is started out with a jazz funeral in New Orleans. So if you don't know what a jazz funeral means, you can just go and watch that 007 movie. It went through quite a lot of it. You can know exactly what it means. And oftentimes it's a Black funeral of a Black person. This is the first 007 movie made with Roger Moore. He's the first. He was after Sean Connery, according to their tradition. There are others that not made by the same people. Okay, the traditional ones are like 24 of them to Daniel Craig, but Roger Moore was the second one because Sean Connery declined. He decided not to do James Bond anymore. And it was interesting that the script of this movie was written by Tom Mankiewicz, because we talked about Mankiewicz before, and there was Joseph Mankiewicz, and Tom is his son, and the nephew. He is nephew of Herman, who is also famous. So if you want to know more about Herman, you can watch a recent movie called Mank, M-A-N-K. That was a quite famous movie with Gary Oldman. And this is a series. Okay, I guess these are people leaving. We are hearing these things, and I could not find the. Okay. So these are the. Oh, okay. There are people getting in. Okay. I was on this one about the funeral, and this is a very famous song, and lots of big name singers have recorded this song as part of their repertoire. And this song in the Sweet By and By was also appearing in these movies because it was so popular for a length of time that by singing this song, it brought up the memory of a lot of people for that time. It's like 1935 to 19 something. But these much later movies, they were talking about something in the past. That's why they put that song in that movie. Okay. And these are some of the movies that I have seen. Some of them I haven't seen. This is a famous movie. If you go find a streaming source, this is a movie to watch. All the detective stories or suspense movies followed the 39 Steps. That was a black and white movie. And this is Sergeant York. That was also about time, huh? And this and this and this. And this is a recent enough movie, 2012, but it's called a revisionist Western because it's not simply a white Western movie, which involves white people as the good guys and Indians are the bad guys. A so-called revisionist Western, for example, like this one has a black person as the main character. They are not talking about a regular Western movie. They have heroes are not authentic or not traditional. Huh? So this is called the revisionist Western. There's another word that I like to mention here. It's called antebellum. Antebellum South is particularly about the South. It's between 1812 and 1812 and 1861. That is after the Revolutionary War and before the Civil War. It's called this period called antebellum, which means after the war, which means after the Revolutionary War. And the people in the South, in the beginning, they were embarrassed that they are having so many slaves and treated the slaves very badly. But during this period of time, they changed their mind. They think that this is a good thing to have slaves, and it's so very stylish. The white society is so flourishing, having lots of money, and treating the black people badly is a good thing. That's called the period that's called the antebellum South. Okay. Okay. Then I'm matching it with Shouliu, which is this one. I hope you have heard of this, which is very simple. And we talked about Li Shutong a while ago, very recently. So we're not going to talk much about him. He was between the Qing dynasty and the Republic. He died before the People's Republic of China came around. So you can't say he is a Chinese person as if he were under that republic or under this republic. Well, partly under this Chiang Kai-shek or Sun Yat-sen's republic, but we just call him between Qing and the Mingguo Shiqi, okay? And he went to Japan to study, and he was exposed to a lot of Western culture in addition to Japanese culture. So he wrote a lot of songs using American or other music. For example, this one is from The Sweet By and By, but some are from Stephen Foster or from Norway, that's Song Bie and other things. Anyway, he wrote music for a lot of songs as well. He studied music, but he also picked or plagiarized many of the Western simple popular songs and fixed them with beautiful Chinese poems. This one is beautiful, but it's not so ancient. The words you all recognize. So, and like 长亭外古道边, there are a few words you may not be able to pronounce, but this one is really, really simple. And he had an older version of the same thing, but it was more difficult to read. Yeah, there are quite a few words I couldn't understand. Okay, so this is what he wrote. But if you go to, say, wiki source, and they have a section on Li Shutong, and he could find out that he wrote hundreds times of works than what we're showing here. He's really a prolific writer of all kinds, not just songs, lyrics, and poems, and so on. He writes a lot of different things, essays and comments. I was going to do these, but I'll just skip them because in this poem you have 眼底里卖绣, this is a very traditional allusion to 树篱 and 卖绣, when it came from the 诗经 and came 史记, so every time you say that the things are going bad and the country is in ruin and so on and so forth, you would say 树篱麦秀. It represents the world is turning upside down and everything is in ruins. You would say 树篱麦秀, which means even whether it's a palace or castle or whatever, it all have gone wild by having all kinds of crops growing here and there because they were not supposed to be there. Okay, so this one is about him, and there are several other. I happen to find this 春游, which is also 李叔同哈，春风吹面薄如纱，春人装束马如花. When we sent it, we probably were not notified that it was by Li Shutong. And the next one is 春夜, is also written by him. And we had it written as 桃李园中黄昏人静. It's a pretty complicated song, but lots of words now have different words because anything that's going on long enough, some words would change. Okay, so that is all for today, and that is at the end of my regular class. And you're welcome to come to my very last class, which is 2 weeks from today, and the topic would be of Mice and Men. This is a movie. It was a book by John Steinbeck, and it was turned into a movie several times, but not as many as others. Yeah, but this is a recent movie, 1992, so you may or may not have watched it, with John Malkovich and Gary Sinise. They are both very respected actors, and it was directed by Gary Sinise. And we're also going to talk about them, their body of works. Gary Sinise is very interesting because he was a director. He made several movies, and he also was in charity work, doing charity because of his acting work in Forrest Gump, in which he played a Vietnam War veteran who lost legs in that movie. And because of him playing that role, a lot of veterans liked him and responded to him, interacted with him. As a result, he established a foundation. It's called Lieutenant Dan's something, because he played Lieutenant Dan in that movie, if you remember. Okay, if you don't have the link, don't worry. You just go to YouTube and look for Of Mice and Men, which was translated into 人鼠之间, and then you would not get too many hits, but one of them definitely should have these two names, John Malkovich and Gary Sinise underneath, and you can just pick it, or you can go by 1992. Okay. And that next class will be the very last, and I will be, I will stop giving English class, but I will still be giving travel talk. And the policy change I mentioned in the beginning of this class was that they would start to charge people who attend these classes. So it doesn't affect my classes. They will start to charge or to restrict them to members and so on. But for the Saturday seminar, they do not charge anything. So anyone can still go to the Zoom room and watch my travel talk, which will be on the same day, the fourth Saturday of April. But later on, they may move it to other dates. So if you want to keep watching it, you can keep your eyes open, and it'll be announced that they were thinking about moving me to a tea time or something. But right now, we don't know anything, okay? So anyone who wants to say anything? And I hope you would say more things to next time. That's the last time of the class, and we'll be talking about movies. And I always welcome people, especially when I talk about movies, because you would bound to have something you want to say. Okay.
Yes.
Anything else?
Just thank you very much. Really
Okay.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're welcome. Uh-huh.
Too sad to talk. Yeah. But,
Okay.
all right.
I really appreciate your coming to my class because I learned so much. Yeah, I would say at least half of what I say was new for me.
I wish you could retain though, if I
Yeah,
can
I'm
remember
losing.
1/10.
Yeah. But at least if you keep trying and keep your exposure to different things, then you
Oh
will.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely broaden the horizon of
Yeah.
knowledge. It's not just the classroom, that kind of a
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
sterilized talk. So it's a very, very interesting. It's
I
open.
try, for example, what I mentioned today, like humanism or eavesdropper or things
Mhm.
like that. It's really not in your classroom that you would
No,
look.
right.
But it's
Yeah.
important as a person living in the West, you should know a lot of different things other than what you learned in Taiwan or China.
Oh, absolutely. That's how you appreciate
Okay.
life, actually. Yeah, very much.
Yeah, I thank you
Yeah.
again. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Uh-huh.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Joe.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.
Joe.
Stop share. That's where I can see. Okay.